723-8289. We are live on Facebook. We are live on YouTube. If you've not seen the visual portion of this program, that's where you can find it. And again, if you go to our website, beyondthebeltway.com, you can see it, you can hear it. You can hear it live. You can hear it on delay. You can hear it a year from now. Once it's up there for a long time. We've got great guests this evening. Judith Sherwin and Michael Lieber are joining me in studio, and Chris Roebling and Scott Hibbard are joining us via Zoom this evening. And I'm going to switch gears and talk about something that I don't believe in the 40-year history of this program, I don't think we've ever spoken about it. Or if we have, maybe it was just one segment. I want to talk about UFOs, because next week there is going to be a government report about UFO, unidentified flying objects, and a lot of effort by a lot of major agencies have gone into it, allegedly. And they are going to have a report to Congress, and I would suggest that maybe later this week there's going to be maybe some big news that comes out of it, or at least some new information, and it will move UFOs from the tin hat discussions to something that maybe is potentially real. And I want to just begin by getting a sense. I'm going to start with you, Michael. Where have you generally come down on UFOs, and is this potentially something important?
Well, I think it's really interesting. I don't consider myself a UFO expert. First of all, let's remember that UFO doesn't necessarily mean from outer space. Right. It could be some Russian or Chinese or who knows superjet. But it could be from outer space.
That's bad too.
That is bad.
That would be a good idea.
We can get to that in the next segment. But in terms of UFO, just in terms of the notion that there are little green aliens in Area 51 that are being probed and so forth, I find it pretty hard to believe, simply because the notion of some vast government conspiracy being able to be kept, I just generally don't believe in that, including the fact that I think if our former president knew about that, he probably would have said something, just like, with the conspiracies with the Kennedy assassination. It would have taken 10 or 20 or 30 people, and at some point, one of them would have written a book and made $1 million. So I don't know. I think it's going to be really interesting. We live in a huge universe. The notion that there are no other intelligent life forms in this vast universe, I think, is pretty remote. So it'll be interesting to see.
Chris Roebling, you mentioned in the first hour that once upon a time you worked for the CIA. You wouldn't tell me what you did. I'm not going to probe that. But again, within the field of intelligence that you may know, you may have met in your political career, where does the serious discussion of UFOs fall? Are there people that really believe it, that have some substance, or is it still somewhat of a crackpot idea?
I think Mike has put his finger on it. A couple of summers ago, it might be 2, might be 3, we had 2 incidents of U.S. Navy ships in the South China Sea and towards Singapore being rammed by commercial vessels. I don't know if you remember that. Both the captains were cashiered, and there were inquiries. I think the prevailing view of what happened then was spoofing, and that is an outside force spoofed the GPS that was directing the 2 commercial vessels so that those vessels would run into American ships. It hasn't happened since. I think there's a lot of reason for that. So I think what we have to really be worried about are UFOs from our own, realm. As far as UFOs from outer space, I think that the astronomers and the physical chemists who read all the spectrography are going to figure out when those might show up. I really don't know anything about that.
Scott Hibbard, your reaction?
I look forward to the report. Seriously, I think in terms of like good governance, transparency is always a good thing. And one of the reasons why you have conspiracy theories is because there's a perception of lack of transparency. And in my work, I've had students that have all kinds of conspiracies about the 9/11 events of 9/11 or what have you. Mm-hmm. And and my assumption is always that if the more information out there, the better. You're going to debunk conspiracy theories by sharing whatever information you have. So To the extent that there are genuine, serious inquiries into UFOs, making that available, I think, is a good thing.
Does anyone know if there's any other nation in the world that is looking at this in a serious manner? Anybody?
No idea.
We don't know.
I would have assumed the Soviet Union would have been all over this because
we've got a much larger footprint of space-involved nations today than we did 40 years ago. I mean, you've got Indian astronauts, you've got Japanese astronauts, you've got Russian astronauts, Chinese, and we're pushing back many frontiers in space. So I think folks are very tuned into what's happening in space. I think that with respect to these sort of Earth originating UFOs, there are obviously folks out there who know more than we do.
Judith?
Yeah, I would agree with Chris. There are folks out there who know a lot more than we do, and I think that the focus suddenly on UFOs really is a sort of deflected focus on the fact that we've had a certain ascendancy in space, which we worked very hard to get after the first shockwave of the Sputnik back in the 50s going up, and to some degree that has been dissipated. The Chinese just landed something on Mars. They sent back pictures. We are no longer alone in space. Forget about other planets, the way we thought we were up until a few years ago. And I think that this focus on UFOs and whether or not we as a species are alone in the universe is now starting to, in some way, deflect to the fact that we may be losing our ground in space, and I don't think we want to do that.
We were also worried, at least many people were worried, and the news media was exploring that concern. Just a couple of weeks ago, when the Chinese debris from one of their rockets, no one knew where it was going to hit, and
particularly
God
the
forbid
Chinese, they had no idea.
But if it would have hit in the middle of Cleveland or some place like that, there could have been significant loss of life.
I think we're all lucky it landed, I believe, in the Indian Ocean. But I mean, that's an issue though that actually every time they send up a rocket and the rocket doesn't come down like the SpaceX rockets are coming down, that's always a concern because you never really know where the space debris is going to go. And I've heard a lot about this. When my son got his PhD at Georgia Tech, he met a number of astronauts, and his master's was about this issue of asteroid deflection and all the junk that's floating around up there. Right. That is a major concern, and the astronauts, if you talk to them about it, will tell you that they are worried about that all the time.
And when we come back, we'll talk more about it and find out whether anybody out there in Radioland is worried about the UFOs, and are you chomping at the bit to read the report when it comes out? 1-800-723-8029 from coast to coast and border to border and around the world at beyondthebeltway.com every Sunday night. I'm Bruce DuMont. Bruce DuMont back. Another segment of Beyond the Beltway. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Let's go to David. He has been standing by very patiently in the beautiful city of Spokane, Washington. Go ahead, David.
Hey there, Bruce. Well, not my intended point of talk, but I actually did have a visual sighting of an unidentified object, I guess, while a pilot in the Marine Corps. But the main thing I was calling to talk about was this Biden interaction. One of your guests was talking about how great he thought Biden was doing. Yes. And I just have to say, on quite a few issues, whether it's what another guest talked about, him waiving sanctions that were keeping the Nord Stream 2 pipeline from, being a win for Russia, killing the XL pipeline, another win for Russia. I mean, the Colonial pipeline getting shut down by Russia. He's helping Russia, everywhere you look. And people talk about Trump being all about Russia. I mean, 1 month after Biden was in office, he sent aid to Palestine, and now we've got 4,000 rockets going into Iran. Now, was that money probably the sole focus of it? Probably not. Maybe partially, maybe. But there also might have been $100 billion that came from the Obama-Biden administration that also was part of that 4,000 rockets being launched. He says he's on Israel's side, but then if you're going to negotiate with Iran, Israel has already said multiple times, as well as other countries in that region, that the deals with Iran are bad for Israel. They don't like these stupid deals we're making with Iran, especially because they didn't have good validation processes. When you make a deal where you have to get authorization to go to anywhere they choose to let you see, that's not a real deal that you're able to monitor their nuclear progress. Unless you can go anywhere you want to go, you're not able to adequately monitor them.
David, stand by for a second. You've given quite a bit to think about. I want to move to Scott Hibbard from DePaul University, who joins us via Zoom this evening. And Scott, I want you to speak to one element of what David has to say, and that is the financial support that the U.S. government and Congress has provided the Palestinians, and to what extent has that money perhaps been used to wage a war against Israel?
So first and foremost, Israel is the largest beneficiary of American aid. We give them about $3.8 billion a year in military equipment and financial benefits and whatnot. And there's only 9 million Israelis, so it's about basically $500 per Israeli. The Palestinians historically received about 200 million, not 400, not more than that, 200 million. The vast majority of which goes to the Palestinian Authority to facilitate economic development and whatnot. We've not been giving money to Hamas, which is the controls Gaza and which has been shooting the rockets. The money goes to the UN or UN Food Program or to the Palestinian Authority. So there's just
where does Hamas get its
none
money?
of the zero US dollars went into paying for those rockets.
That cannot be asserted, Scott. You cannot say that.
Absolutely true.
But I can tell you for certainty that we definitely help pay for the military.
Folks, I know you all want, just a second. I know you all want to talk. I'm going to let you all talk, but you have to talk one at a time. So let me call on you. Chris Roebling, to you, and then Judith's got a comment, and then back to Scott. Go ahead.
The Obama administration freed up billions and billions of dollars for the Iranians. The Iranians support Hamas. And even with respect to the 200 million, which I think you're using a very, very narrowly designed definition of what's going from the United States to the Palestinians, you have got the fungibility of capital all across these entities. So when we are giving more than, I think, 150 or 200 billion dollars to Iran, Iran in turn is supporting Hamas in the accumulation of war materiel. For you to say on this show to all of Bruce's listeners, we didn't pay for any of that is fatuous nonsense. We may well have paid for a lot more of that than anybody in this range of this program.
Let's let Scott respond.
First of all,
Scott.
We did not give Iran anything. We unfroze money that was theirs in accounts that we control. So that's
ridiculous.
This is more in the fatuous area.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Continue, Scott, and then we're going to go to Judith.
Well, and again, going back to the Iranian nuclear deal, there were very robust sanctions. We followed the Reagan narrative, trust but verify. The IAEA had full inspection rights of all of the nuclear facilities in Iran. That's clear. I don't know where you're getting your information. Do your homework. And and again, at the end of the day, what part of the reason why we engaged in the diplomatic negotiations with or diplomatic engagement with Iran was the other alternatives were not optimal. I mean, our doing nothing would mean that they would end up having a nuclear weapon, if not this year, then next year or the year
Scott,
after.
let me interrupt
so doing
you.
Doing nothing
now.
is unacceptable.
Let me go.
And then the alternative is war.
One second. One second. I want to go to Judith, and then I'm going to get Michael involved, and we'll continue the discussion. But Judith, you want to button this conversation
I do.
up.
Well, first of all, I keep hearing that they either have to get a nuclear weapon or there's going to be a war. That's not the only two alternatives, which should be rather obvious over what's happened in the last 4 years. The fact that they have moved ahead with getting a nuclear weapon is a byproduct of the treaty that was entered into with the Obama administration. It is exactly what Netanyahu pointed out was going to happen. It is exactly what most of the security people in Israel pointed out was going to happen. The time has gone by. They have enriched uranium. They have done it outside of the parameters of the treaty. They have not allowed inspections. If I have a right to inspect, and the guy I'm inspecting tells me where I can inspect and when I can inspect, and he's trying to do so. Now, let me finish. That's not a great right of inspection. If you're going to have a right of inspection for something as serious as somebody trying to enrich uranium to make a nuclear weapon, that should be without notice, and that should be any place where they are doing this stuff. And if you can't make that kind of agreement a reality, then you shouldn't make it, all right?
Okay.
Because that's not the alternative. Everything, well, let me just finish.
All of
the foreign policy discussions that we have tonight, and we had it about the cybersecurity, everything is, well, we either do this and make some sort of agreement, or there's going to be a war. That's not true. There's a lot of place between certain agreements that are made and ending up in a war.
Scott Hibbard, let me ask you.
I can respond to that.
There is an alternative, but then I want to ask you another question. Go ahead.
Diplomatic engagement. And this is what the Obama administration did. They engaged in coercive diplomacy. They ramped up the sanctions on Iran to get them to the negotiating table, and they negotiated a deal to start dismantling. I mean, not just
that's false.
Slowing down.
That's false. They didn't dismantle anything.
Look, Bruce,
one second. Just one second.
You talk about doing your homework, Scott.
And
they did not negotiate a deal to dismantle. They negotiated a deal to push off until the end of the 9th year or the 11th year, whichever one it was. That was the deal. The deal was not to dismantle the Iranian nuclear program. And even if the deal
they had to dismantle their capacity to.
They did not.
Use such
did not.
That is true.
You are saying,
do your homework.
A was not agreed
homework.
to, and
One
B
second.
was not done.
All right.
Michael Lieber.
Spoiler alert for everybody who is a panelist tonight and everybody across the country and around the world who's listening. At some point, whether we like it or not, whether we want it or not, Iran is going to have a nuclear weapon. And you know what? And wait, hold on. And so is Saudi Arabia. Just as hold on, let me finish. Just as North Korea has, just as the United States and the Soviet Union did. And everybody knows that there's mutual assured destruction, and we can spend all this time talking about it, but people are going to get the bombs, and they're never going to use them.
Well, first of all, the point of mutually assured destruction, you expect the Iranian government that shouts death to America and wants to destroy the state of Israel have not been very shy. When people tell you who they are, you should listen to them.
Absolutely. Look at North Korea has had nuclear weapons for, 20 years? They're crazier than the Iranians. They haven't used them yet.
That's true. I don't know that that's true.
Because they know what will happen. I mean,
the Iranians don't care what will happen if they.
You think the North Koreans care more?
I think the Iranians care more about would like to drop a bomb on Israel and some of their other enemies in the Middle East.
You do know that
they don't care what happens because it will also happen to them.
You do realize it would kill a ton of Palestinians, and you do realize that the wind blows west toward the West Bank.
They don't care. I'm trying to get that across to you.
But I'm trying to get to you.
The treaty was a chimera just to put things off and pretend they were doing something. They did nothing.
Folks, let me ask this question. I'm going to ask you, Chris Roebling first, and then Scott Hibbard. Give me short answers, if you will. Where does Hamas get its money? Chris
Mainly
Roebling.
from Iran.
Right.
Mainly from Iran.
And the international community.
And Saudi Arabia, and Persian Gulf.
And Qatar.
They're Sunni power. They get money from
I'm
Persian
sorry.
Gulf
Hold on. Saudi and the Gulf have gone from this much funding 25 years ago to this much funding today.
That's right.
This is my area, Scott. I know what I'm talking about. They are not getting the same amount of support.
Not from the governments, but there's still permissive fundraising environment within the civil society.
It is nothing compared to what's coming from Iran.
Right.
It is nothing compared to what they're doing with the fungibility of international community funding that gets through the UN into the PA and into Hamas.
Right. That's right.
We've got to
I'm telling you,
pause.
there's still a lot of money
We've
coming
got
out
to
of the Persian
pause.
Gulf, so.
We will be back. We got 2 more segments to go. I'm Bruce DuMont. 1-800-723-8289. Thanks very much, David from Spokane. You got your quarters worth tonight. Back shortly. Bruce DuMont back. Nice to have you with us. Judith Sherwin is with us this evening, and she is got a bee in her bonnet because she is a graduate of John Marshall Law School, and you may have read that they have been canceled. Judith, tell us what got your back up this week.
Yeah, I am an alumna of that school, and I received an email over the weekend that they have changed the name of the law school because they are ashamed of John Marshall. They say he's a slave owner, and even though he may have been one of the great jurists of our country, in many ways a founding father of what the Constitution has come to mean, practically created judicial review. Nobody knew it would work that way. The Supremacy Clause and a few other things I can think of, which I suppose have all fallen into favor or disfavor now. And they have taken his name out of the law school because certain people are offended by the fact that he was a man of his time from Virginia who had a plantation on which there were slaves. I don't know much more about it than that because I really didn't have a chance to look into it after I got the email. But we have reached a place in this country where we are just as ridiculous as the jokes we used to make about the Soviet Union when they made Lenin a non-person and they made Stalin a non-person. We are now making our founding fathers non-persons. I don't agree that John Marshall should have had slaves, but he was a man of that time. He was a man of that place. So was Thomas Jefferson and a whole bunch of the other founding fathers. Are we going to cancel them all? Maybe we are. And that's very dangerous for the country.
In a strange way, this makes me think of a skit on last night's Saturday Night Live,
God.
where they were showing supposedly a 1998 rebroadcast of an episode of Hollywood Squares. I don't know if you saw it.
I saw it.
But some of the guests on Hollywood Squares have now been canceled. Bill Cosby,
right.
Apu from The Simpsons, a number of different people.
Right.
My feeling is people live in the time that they were. We have to understand that. We should live and learn that slavery is wrong and racism is wrong. Absolutely. And try to learn and do better than people who didn't have the benefit of the foresight that we have. But I'm not a big fan of cancel culture either.
Okay.
Scott Hibbert, your response from a college perspective.
I'm in the same boat. I mean, it's we're bringing today's standards of judgment to to people of a different era, and I'm not a fan.
Chris Roebling.
You're muted, Chris.
You're muted, Chris.
But I think Chris is a big fan of cancel culture.
I think so.
I'll speak for Chris. Chris is a big fan of cancel culture.
There is an expression, and when you study philosophy of history, does historicism lead to historicity? That's exactly what's happened to the left. Number 3, if you want to know about John Marshall, I really recommend, this is Lynn, not her daughter, this is a heck of a book about John Marshall, Madison, Jefferson, Lincoln, and Monroe. Marshall really got into the heads of Madison and Jefferson and Lincoln and, I'm sorry, Madison, Jefferson, Monroe, and Washington. There's Washington over there. He was really a part of that, and they really detested him, but they also admired him. And you cannot believe how much these guys argued about what the Constitution meant, and they were all involved except for Washington directly. The other three were, and Marshall, were writing the Constitution. 10 years later, they couldn't agree on what it meant.
Right. Well, I mean, Marbury versus Madison. The Madison is our friend President Madison, who tried to ignore a rather clear directive of how the Constitution was supposed to work with appointments. And John Marshall put him in his place.
Thank you for that visual depiction for us, Chris.
Yeah,
I just happen to have it next to me, so I thought I'd use it.
It's great. It saves time for our graphics department.
I'll go get it.
We are going to go to a call. Another person been very patient. Mark is listening to us. Is it Carmel by the sea in California? Mark, you there? Mark is gone. He must have been taken away by one of those UFOs who we can read about next week. One of the other things, obviously, that people have been talking about, which is separating Republicans from Democrats, and that is on the definition of what is true infrastructure. And it's one of the congressional battles that's been going on between Joe Biden and Democrats in the House and Senate. And I want to give you an opportunity, Mike, to make a point, because it's been a while since you made a political point on this show, at least as it relates to Republican Democratic politics. Do you agree? I mean, if we were to ask you to raise your hand and take an oath, would you agree that the definition of infrastructure that has been perpetuated by House and Senate Democrats, that you could agree with all of the items on that list, or most of them?
Well, certainly some of them are infrastructure: roads, bridges, airports, the grid, broadband. Now, there are other things like aid for, people who are in their 50s or 60s who have to take care of their elderly parents. Yeah. It's not infrastructure, but it's necessary. And actually, it will be a net positive, I think, for the economy. And it's certainly something that both Democrats and Republicans and independents, those kinds of things that we want. So should
the Democrats then separate out those items, right, put them in a bill called Other Important Necessities of Life, and let people vote on that, as opposed to trying to pass off and create a new word or a new definition of infrastructure?
I'm actually perfectly fine with that, because, then I think it's actually a bad strategy by the Republicans to try to separate it, because all of these things pull well with the American public. And so what you do by separating it is it gives the Democrats two wins: a win on the infrastructure bill and a win on these other things that more Americans than not want. So, sure, separate
Chris, do you agree with that there's a lot of goodies on that bill that Republicans are upset with now, but there isn't a Republican that's going to reject them if they're sent a check in the mail?
The Democrats are masters of creating must-pass legislation. Must-pass legislation is really the beating heart of the Washington swamp. And must-pass means Christmas tree. So people put everything on there. The infrastructure bill, and then Trump and Congress, Pelosi and Trump and Mitch McConnell started spending trillions of dollars, probably ill-advisedly, and that has opened the door to the Democrats spending, 4 or 5, they want to spend 6 or 8 trillion in this year. And that is going to have horrible consequences. And this started with Trump spending too much then and Trump not wanting to split the difference. So one of these days, the law of gravity is going to apply, and we're going to have some economic problems because we have just turned on the printing press and we think that could be prosperity. The printing press does not equal prosperity. It equals inflation. And so we are going to beggar the middle class that was doing well under Trump for the first time in 25, 30 years, and is now going to end up in a stagflation situation because Democrats don't have any policy except expanding government and spending more money.
$1 trillion here, $1 trillion there.
Well,
what's a
let me
trillion
respond to
between
just a couple
friends?
points. First of all, I've always
Hibbard.
considered myself fiscal conservative, and it kills me that the debt is where it is today. And I worked in Congress when we passed two bills that helped put the Reagan deficits onto a track to balanced budget. The first one was led by George Herbert Walker Bush, and the second one was by Bill Clinton. All that aside, one of the things I find fascinating about the infrastructure bill is part of the reason why you're redefining it is it's really, and people may not want to hear this, but it's an industrial policy bill, that it's really trying to rebuild American manufacturing and rebuild or invest in areas where there are prospects for cutting edge technologies and new lines of employment, whether that's in green energy or building electric cars or whatnot. And that's central to what this is. Now, in order to get that passed, you're going to have to redefine the notion of infrastructure. And I can't believe I'm agreeing with Chris, but Washington, I will use the word omnibus bill, right? I mean, this is the way stuff gets done through Congress. It gets put together in an omnibus package. There's any number of provisions that are marshaled through different committees, and at the end of the day, it's an up or down vote, and that's how you get stuff through, and that's what'll happen.
So you don't think there's a simple way, Chris Roebling, if we were to come up with a list of things that are necessities, at least as Michael Lieber has described them, and put another name on it, that it would pass, that Republicans would support it, because they, in essence, would be responding to something that the Democrats did, which is basically rethinking the definition of a bill and repackaging it.
To give you an idea of the seriousness of the infrastructure package, in the last several days, the states of Arkansas and Tennessee have discovered an actual crack, a full-on crack in the I-40 bridge over the Mississippi River at Memphis.
Oh, my God.
I've driven over that bridge.
Right.
I've driven over that bridge. I've driven both ways over that bridge, and I can tell you, had they not, God love them, God love them, God love them for finding it, and had they not found it, goodness only knows what would have happened. We need an infrastructure bill. It is everything we're living through right now, since the political analysis show, I'll just tell you, everything we're going through right now is because Paul Ryan woke up after Trump won and didn't know who the hell he was and decided to play Hamlet.
Right.
Paul Ryan should have put forward the infrastructure bill on the 23rd of January, 2017. So we have needed a comprehensive infrastructure bill. In Obama's $900 billion, there were
We got to
only
pause, Chris Roebling. We got to cross. You're about to go into an Obama attack, and we'll hear it in a moment. Bruce DuMont back. Marion Marshall, who's a listener, she sends me a note. She says, "Oh my God, my husband's name is John Marshall." So we'll see if
he's been canceled.
Don't want to cancel him.
He's got to cancel.
We don't want to cancel him.
We don't want to cancel him. We
No.
hope everything is alive and well on the Marshall Family Domestic Fund. Scott Herod, back to you, because earlier in the broadcast we did talk about what's going on between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And I can't tell you how many times in the 40-year history of this program we have commemorated ceasefires in the Middle East. In reality, is this something that's going to happen just every 4 to 5 years?
Hopefully not. I think the way it's situated, though, that it's likely, and probably more often than that. I mean, we haven't, the underlying issues which gave rise to the conflict have not gone away. And, in some respects, you've got multiple conflicts going on. You've got conflicts within the Palestinian community, between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. You got a divided government within Israel. You have a continuing military occupation of 5 million Palestinians who live under military Israeli control, West Bank, Jerusalem, and Gaza. And as long as, particularly in the West Bank and in Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, where this original flashpoint occurred, people are being pushed out of their homes, being pushed off their lands. As long as, and there's no recourse, or the recourse to the courts is not seen as fair. Insofar as you have that, you're going to continue to have tensions. And to be honest with you, I was always a big two-state solution fan. I was a big supporter of the Oslo peace process for any number of reasons. I'm not sure that is even viable at this stage. And so I don't know there is a solution. And, you've got 200 million 2 million Palestinians living basically in an open air prison in Gaza.
Judy
and
Sherwin,
with 50% unemployment. I mean, it's just a disaster.
What in the world are you saying?
I mean, this is completely ridiculous. All right, wait, Chris,
Judith Sherwin, hold it. Judith Sherwin. Judith Sherwin.
Chris,
Israel has before it
hold it.
Area up.
Chris, Judith Sherwin has the floor, and then we'll go back to the conversation.
Yes,
Judith,
please,
quickly,
thank you. So
summarize.
first of all, the conflict which began all of this has to do with the historic ownership of some apparently 6 houses in East Jerusalem. Those houses were owned by Jordan, actually, and they have always been since 1887. They have been. They were part of Jordan, but when the Israelis took over in 1967, it was acknowledged that those properties were owned by Jews. They had purchased those properties from the Ottoman Empire going back to 1887. Okay. There are people living in those houses who have not paid rent in 50 years, all right? That's not a very good situation for a landlord. The courts have dealt with this over and over again. And you should understand that the Israeli Supreme Court is very, very liberal in terms of its interpretations and its belief in the rights of the Palestinians, and has come down on the Palestinian side on a number of occasions. On this particular occasion, they have not, because the rules and the law relating to this property make it very clear that these properties are owned by Jews, and that the people the Israeli government has offered to the people living there, you can continue to live here, just pay the rent. They refuse to do that. Okay. In most normal societies, there is a remedy for that, and the remedy is not to start shooting rockets.
Okay, Scott, back to you, and then we're going to go to Chris. Scott?
So, first of all, some of the families in that Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood were displaced from Haifa and Jaffa.
That doesn't make so.
And they have no right to return to the homes that they were displaced from in 1948. And
they displaced themselves.
And
Scott,
they did not. They were not displaced.
It's Scott's turn. Go ahead.
1948, they weren't displaced.
No, they displaced themselves. But you go ahead.
Okay, so they were forced out of their homes, and they fled they lived in refugee camps in Jordan, and Jordan gave them the properties that they then controlled in this area of East Jerusalem. When in 1967, after East Jerusalem was annexed, it threw the question of
in 1967 when Jerusalem was
litigating this for the 1970s, and it's not clear. I think that's the point.
I want to bring this. Making up stuff.
Judith, there are people that are home saying you're making up stuff. So I'm trying to get a discussion. Just 1 second, Chris, because I've got just a few minutes left, and I want to switch gears, but focus on the same issue, and I want to start with Michael. Do you acknowledge that the growing support for Palestine in Congress is creating or potentially can create a problem for the Democratic members of Congress because things are more split? They seem to be a little more even in the discussion along Capitol Hill because of the Squad primarily. They get the ear of the president. They certainly get the ear of the media. And outside my house, I mean, I for 2 nights in a row, I've had several thousand people marching, and they're marching in major cities all over the world.
The answer is the Democrats. There's not some burgeoning pro-Palestinian part of the Democratic Party. It's 3 or 4 or 5 people in Congress who aren't powerful, who don't head up committees. And unfortunately,
but who represent congressional districts where pro-Palestinian positions are very popular. Right. They wouldn't have gotten elected with anything less than that.
Right, but there's still one. They're 4% of the Democratic members in Congress. The unfortunate thing I was just going to say is the Gaza thing, it's wash, rinse, repeat. I don't know that anything's going to change anytime soon.
Gotta go. Thank you for all. See you next week. Bye-bye.
It's not just...
We're done.